The person sitting next to me on the couch today is someone, the rare person, who is actually deserving of the title of local legend when it comes to contributions to a specific scene. He's been DJing for more than 30 years now. Please join me in welcoming Rui Vargas. So 30 years is a very long time to be DJing, but to go back even before that first year that you were DJing in front of a crowd, when did you first become aware of DJing as a concept, of someone standing in front of the audience and mixing together records for the enjoyment of other people?
I didn't have any notion what a DJ was until actually I was DJing almost. I didn't have a goal or a dream to become a DJ. I spent my youth listening to music. Lisbon in the 70s, Portugal in the 70s was a monochromatic society, grey, trying to recover from 50 years of dictatorship and 50 years of censorship. And we were educated by our parents, by our grandparents, not to get away from the norm, not to deviate from the mainstream. Be humble, be quiet, don't make any fuss. So that's more or less what I did. I was very shy still am. I was a very shy boy. A few friends. So what I did was coming from school, starting to listen to the radio. I was 12 or 13. By then, there was a radio comercial, a national radio. It was a very important radio by then, and with great shows all across the board. You could listen in lunchtime, imagine. Lunchtime you could listen to a program called Discoteca, which was funk, disco, and black music overall. And then rock and stock, more pop and alternative pop. And at night, I stopped everything to listen to Som de Frente. Alternative rock, indie radio show that conquered and educated several generations, I believe, of Portuguese people, made by António Sérgio. He was a major key in my education, I can say that, in my musical upbringing. And everything he would say, it was like God speaking to me directly. That was more or less the important, and the importance he transmitted, speaking on a microphone, on a radio. And radio always had this magic side to it, like a guy somewhere in the middle of Lisbon, Portugal, I don't know where, speaking to a microphone, and I'm here listening to it through the air. It still is magic for me too. Every time I think about it, but I started a relationship with radio, with António Sérgio in particular, and listening to everybody, and cultivating myself by myself.
What was he saying specifically that spoke to you?
First, the wide array of music he showed us, always in high levels of risk quality. He was thinking out of the box. He's considered the John Peel in Portugal, the Portuguese John Peel. I don't know. Maybe I prefer António Sérgio because he has this strong, dark not dark, like low voice, bass voice. It was, every time he would open the mic, you would feel like, whoa. And he showed me the last punk records, the new age, the post-punk, the first electronic records that I've heard. One of them, we could listen to it because it's from that era, and also listening to António Sérgio and listening to radio on a constant basis, on a daily basis. It's also developed my interests and my relationship with the night itself, because in the night you can you can listen to all details in the music. You don't have noise. The radio shows were broadcasted at around midnight, from midnight to 2, and I'm talking about Som da Frente and Rolls Rock before that. And at night, everything made more impact and more sense, and that's also one of the reasons I believe I started to live at night, and more at night than on a daytime.
You were preparing to be a DJ 10 years before you actually became.
I believe so. So basically, I never, and going back to your question, never thought on being a DJ. I didn't know even what a DJ was by then. But I had this hidden secret will to be a radio presenter. But since I was such a shy guy and with some awkward socially behaviors, wasn't feeling fit in any groups that I knew at school. I developed this imaginary world with music, and until I found a guy. I was like, it was in '84. I remember because we had the same passion with these bands, and he lent me a record by Echo and the Bunnymen on '84, Porcupine, or '83 or '84. So I met Zé Pedro Moura, who had a big gang, musical-driven gang. They had bands. They were listening to music constantly together, every day, every night. So I finally found, okay, I belong somewhere, and now they are my mates, and I started to hang out with them, and by accident he started also DJing in Fragil, and I started to bring some records and play some records with him, and it was a matter of, instead of only showing my records to my friends, which is, I don't conceive to collect records or buy records to be in a shelf at home. I have to share my records with someone, my family or my friends or someone. Suddenly my friends were not enough, and I started to take my records to a broader audience or a broader circle of friends, and that was the Fragile days, maybe, in '87, '88.
Well, I think we're going to talk a lot about Fragile, but for now, thinking about you being in that role of sitting around midnight to 2 in the morning, I want to play something that might trigger some memories for you of that time, and maybe we can talk about that afterwards.
Shoot.
Yeah.
Ready to go.
Now imagine hearing this for the first time in '81.
What was that?
This is Laurie Anderson. At the time, she was only an avant-garde artist doing performances in New York. It's one of her first records. and it's a prayer to God called "Oh Superman." And listening to this, you could almost realize and believe that Superman existed and God existed, and there's life in other planets whatsoever, because it was so far, so alien, this music, when you heard it for the first time in the airwaves, listening to radio.
Do you mean not just something like "Oh Superman," but something with that sort of electronic
sound,
mood and sound?
Yeah, the sound. Everything made sense because everything is mysterious. And actually, vocoder, which is the kind of instrument that is used here to change the voice, is something that came from the spies to disguise their voices. Spy technology. It's not musical technology. Music appropriated the technology to do instruments, and it was the first time I heard vocoder, and listening to this for the first time, like I said, was just a kick in the head, and opened a whole new world of sound and possibilities for me.
So you mentioned, we've listened to Laurie Anderson, you mentioned Echo and the Bunnymen. How many of these bands that you were listening to, or music in general, did it seem like was coming from outside of Portugal? Or was there still this hangover that you're describing from the revolution?
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah. How much of the music that you were responding to at this time was Portuguese music?
Not a lot, to be fair. There was some bands like 81, 82, yeah. The Heróis do Mar, maybe they had the first album. Carlos Maria Trindade was here yesterday, one of the members of the band. There weren't. I wasn't really too interested. The Chutos, of course, they had already one or two singles, but I wasn't really deep into Portuguese music by the time.
And when you started DJing, how much of what you were DJing was what would now be considered, house music, or things that were not like Echo and the Bunnymen or Laurie Anderson? But
when we started DJing, or when I started DJing, like back in '88, there wasn't like a house night or techno night or whatever night. There was music that people could dance to, and you could easily go from the Clash to B-52s to a dub record to one of the first hip-hop records, to Grandmaster Flash or Sugar Hill Gang or the first house records coming from Chicago or from Detroit, and it wasn't strange. Of course, the changing BPMs from, I wasn't really a technical DJ. I was just playing records and following the groove or trying to. But there wasn't like these barriers where you could or you should be confined when playing music, when playing records.
Did you have a specialty at that point? Did you have the one track that you always knew you could reach to when something might be going wrong on the dance floor, or that you wanted to surprise people with?
I always loved to play B-52s, the first album by B-52s, or the dub Magnificent Seven by Clash, or Linton Kwesi Johnson, or one of the, or Marshall Jefferson, one of my favorites. It's also there in your laptop.
So when, just to go back a bit, you said 1988 was when you started DJing in front of an audience. Where was that, and how did you actually get that gig?
Like I said, it's Zé Pedro, my friend, who still is a resident in Lux. He got this job DJing in Fragil, in Old Fragil in Bairro Alto. Sorry. And I started to come with him and bring some records with him and play with him, but I wasn't invited to play there. But by then, normally the clubs, they had their own records. The records mostly were not carried by the DJs. The records were there, and the resident DJ would pick up the songs and the records to play and did a set with the house records.
Had you been much of a club goer up to that point in places other than Fragil? Like, what was the scene in Lisbon at the time in terms of what might have been offering things you were actually interested in from a musical perspective?
There was the only place for me to go out was the neighborhood Bairro Alto. It was where the places and the kind of music I was interested in at the moment were being played. Places like Fragil, of course, or Três Pastorinhos, which was more of black music, disco, funk, boogie kind of thing. And then Café Concerto, or there's one, Sudoeste. I also was a resident in this place near Fragil called Sudoeste. I was a resident there for 6 months in '88 also. And they were playing new beats with house, with alternative rock. And that was the scene, the Bairro Alto scene, at least, at the moment.
What distinguished Fragil then? What made it special?
Everything. First, the idea of going into Fragil was already something that put you alert there and willing to party, because you'd never know if you get in the club. I was denied maybe 6 times before getting inside, and I got inside because of Zé Pedro, because he was working there. So it was like, am I going to get in or am I not? It was, and there inside, it was a whole new world, like a shelter for all sorts of people that were thinking out of the box and thinking differently, creative people that involved people from arts whatsoever, from cinema, from newspapers, from theater, and there you could feel safe, and you could be different, and you can speak different things and be yourself without any judgment. Like I said, it was a very conservative society still. I started to go to Fragil maybe in '86 or something, but it was like a magnet to interesting and nice people and people that were feeling they belonged somewhere in Fragil. People that were strayed around the city, and they found somewhere where they could be themselves and without judgment, and sexually, socially, artistically, whatsoever, freedom.
And I assume that you're including yourself in that group in the sense of being a shy person who went to Fragil and suddenly felt like there was this world here that...
Yeah, well, absolutely. I was already doing radio by then also, professionally. And now my radio show would end at 2 o'clock, and every day I would go from the radio to Fragil without any. I wouldn't say to anyone that I was going. I was just going, and because I knew that it's going to be a good night. I will meet interesting people, or my friends will be there, and I would go out every single night from 2 to 4.
So when had you started working radio professionally then? So 1986, when you started going to Fragil, you'd already been doing radio professionally.
Fragil in '88.
Okay.
Radio professionally in the same year exactly. So I started first in the university radio, pirate radio. First as a technical assistant, doing microphone levels and putting commercials, which were broadcasted in cassettes, in the old cassettes, like play, stop, pause, and rewind with a pencil. You had to cue it with a pencil. And then they invited me to participate in one of their shows, and I started to have a show there. And then I started doing professional radio in Correio da Manhã Radio, where I had this slot, first from 2 to 7 at night, 1 week on, 1 week off, and then from midnight to 2, and that was when I started also to go a lot to Fragil.
And what did pirate radio mean in Portugal at that time? Because pirate radio is sort of this loose term for illegal radio, but I assume that there were more nuances to that.
For small periods of time, and I don't recall why, the frequencies were open, so everybody could broadcast without the police coming to and rescue and take your material. So it was like there were like a explosion of little radios everywhere in the neighborhood and all across the country, until I believe in '90 there were like a contest to choose 4 radios in Lisbon and 4 radios in Porto, and like to limit the. But going to your question, it meant freedom. It meant freedom to, without any commercial concerns, you could play whatever you want to and be obnoxious sometimes and do some crazy programs that made no sense nowadays.
Was it difficult at all for you to get your hands on the music that you wanted to play at that point? If we're talking 88,
Absolutely.
89, this is when house was sort of blowing up internationally. So,
but even before that, it was very difficult to get to the records, because that's why radio made such an important role by then, because the record labels in Portugal worked very poorly. They released a few records with bad pressings most of the time, and most of the good music wasn't released in Portugal. And when it was released, it was like months later. It was a pre-internet. We didn't have internet then, so every time a familiar or a friend would travel to London or to Paris, we would ask, can you go to each HMV and bring me some records? There were 2 record shops importing, or 2 or 3 record shops importing by then records, but they were very expensive for a young teenager like myself.
and you weren't getting records for free just because you were at the radio, because it was a pirate station at that point.
Yeah, by then there wasn't that chance. Only later when I got professionalized. But in the 80s there was like very important, I would say, 2 record shops. for the scene. One directly linked to the bairro alto scene and the underground, more alternative scene, which was called Controverso, which was like a pole of, well, again, a magnet for music lovers, and the guy who ran the shop called Zé Guedes, he was a very astute guy. He would import from industrial Belgium or EDM to Alexander O'Neill, soul, hip hop, techno, house, but very impeccable chosen. And it was, everybody would spend like afternoons there talking with each other and exchanging notes and information, because information was scarce by then. We had newspapers, Melody Maker, New Musical Express, billboards, and a few other, not so many other magazines or newspapers imported again. So the major way to pass around information was speaking with your mates, with your friends, and with your music lovers, friends.
And at this point, you had no aspirations to actually make music. You were solely focused on, I want to buy records, I want to play records for people.
Absolutely. I think I never had that trigger. I can do this, or I think I'm prepared to do music. I never felt I was prepared. Maybe, and I always thought of it as it's okay. I don't feel pressure to be a producer or to make music like nowadays. It has become. In my generation, there are a lot of guys that it's normal. My profession is to pick the best records I can find and play them. It's not to pretend I'm a good producer or to pretend I make good music, because 90% of the people that think like that, they are wrong. And you can, and from one side, it's great. Everybody is willing to have a go and do it yourself. It's the punk motto, and it's a motto that I defend every time. At the same time, it's hard to find a good record nowadays. A record that really is striking, new, fresh, and you listen to a lot of the same beats, the same samples over and over until you find a good record. Maybe that's why there's so much thing going on now at the moment with old records, and going back to digging and finding gems that weren't discovered before. The production, there are amazing people doing music still, of course, but I think I never did music because of respect of the musicians, because I wasn't feeling prepared to compete and to be up there with them.
Let's play another song that, even if it's not a new one, I think at a certain point in time it probably represented something shockingly new.
Absolutely. So this was maybe the first house record I've heard.
What record was that?
And this is Marshall Jefferson. In the project he has like Jungle Wounds, and the song is called The Jungle. It was 88 maybe when I've heard this for the first time, and it was from a tape from a radio show by Jazzy B. He was then one of the first DJs in the Kiss FM in London, and he was also the mentor or leader from Soul to Soul, a band quite popular then. And in the middle of funk, soul, and more low beat songs he played in the show. He played this track, and I went also like bananas with it, and I just wanted to know what it was and have this record and hear it loud on the dance floor, and I think maybe it's one of the first records that wanted me to go to a dance floor with my eyes closed, and it's kind of a trademark of the sound I like, and I still play.
What do you mean by that?
Organic, electronic at the same time, deep, melodic, mysterious, moody. It's my cup of tea, my kind of thing, I guess. So from then on, I went to another record shop, which was called Bimotor, specially focused on dance music. That record shop also quite important for the scene then. And I started buying records, every Trax records and every Chicago records that I could find.
How did the Lisbon crowd respond when you were playing these records? Because the story of House Jumping to the UK is that a song like Strings of Life cleared the floor one week, and then a month later, that's only when it became a hit, but people were too confused by it at first. It was so against what they wanted out of the music at that point.
I remember clearing the floor also with some of my first house choices, but like I said, they were mixed with other more familiar kind of sounds. So it was like a moment, okay, like let's do this, let's clear the floor. And we would play it, and of course, but it wasn't that hard, amazingly. I think people got it, not instantly, but it was quite a quick reaction. And soon after, there were nights more focused on house, and in clubs, in bigger clubs in Lisbon, like Kremlin or Alcantara Mar, and but with a harder sound, with a harder and faster sound, more European than American.
More European, but still not Portuguese?
That came a little bit later. Of course, everybody in the room knows the phenomenon that was So Get Up by the underground sound of Lisbon. Thanks mainly to, of course, to those two guys, but also to Antonio Cunha, which was the label owner or the label master, and he always tried to push our music, the Portuguese music, to other territories across our physical frontiers, and because of the phenomenal world success of USL, a lot of producers emerged, and they were also like embraced not only by Chaos, this label, but also by a very important guy in the history of that Portuguese scene, which is an American guy called Rob Di Stefano, who ran Tribal America in the 90s, which was one of the best, most important house music labels in the 90s, with Deep Dish, Danny Tenaglia, Club 69, a lot of fresh new producers that started in that label. Like I said, after the underground sound of Lisbon, Urban Dreams, Ozone, Cult of Crimeria, Luís Leite, Torre Richard, they all they all rode the wave, the Portuguese wave, and people outside of Portugal paid attention.
We're talking about the mid-90s at this point.
The mid-90s, yeah.
When did that wave crash, and what happened in Lisbon after that? You know, there was so much international attention on the scene at a certain point, and it didn't sustain, at least not the same musically.
It is weird, actually. I don't have an explanation for that, but it faded away, just slowly fade away. When we thought, okay, we have the media, the international media attention, they were calling Portugal the new Ibiza, or the paradise called Portugal, underground house music from a paradise called Portugal, and big raves started to happen in castles and in huge warehouses with thousands of people. So we created the momentum, the big momentum. Everything was growing, and everybody was having a party, really. And things started to fade away because there were like divisions in the scene. There were parties that were a rip-off. There were problems eventually, and I think the production didn't cope also with the momentum that created. Somehow, only Underground Sound of Lisbon and a few others continued a few more years to produce records and hit records, but things started to fade away a few years after.
But then, at the end of the 90s, the club opened, right?
Yeah.
That went on to define the next 2 decades of your life.
At least for me, of course.
Probably people in this room know what I'm talking about, but for the sake of the lecture, what am I referring to, and how did this come about, and more importantly, who was behind it?
Okay, the same team, obviously Manuel Reis, the owner of Fragil, and the people around him. We were thinking that Fragil was already, not only Fragil, but the whole neighborhood was fading, and Fragil was limited for what we wanted to do. So we started to look for options and places to move to, and expand our horizons, and to change again another part of the city, and that was Manuel's fault again. It dramatically changed the life in Bairro Alto, which was before a neighborhood with hookers, journalists and sailors. Journalists because there were actually newspapers working in the neighborhood, not because the journalists were chasing the hookers. But yeah, it was like that. It was a shady neighborhood. Nobody would go there until they opened a restaurant, and 2 years later, Fragil opened in '82, and the whole scene started to emerge. And the same will was put in action in another area of Lisbon that was forgotten, middle of the halfway from the center to the new Lisbon that was inaugurated that year with the Expo 98. So it was a no man's land, and we took over a warehouse that I went there in '97 for the first time, and they were repairing engines for ships, and it was like a building to support machinery from boats and stuff. Crumbling apart, the building almost. And it was our dream that came through.
How much of a role did Manuel have in shaping the musical vision of Lux?
He had, I think the best answer to that is that he trusted he trusted people, and he gave chance to people, because he musically he never or hardly gave opinions about music, but he trusted the people he was working with, and it was always like that. And I'm sorry. But apart from the music, he took care of everything, for the aesthetics, the people, the collaborators, the artists he invited to do a chair or a new decoration for the Lux, the colors of the stairs, the colors of everything. He spent the whole day there. Every morning around 11 he would be there, and he would leave at 8 o'clock for 19 years. He would be there at night. He was completely obsessed in a good way with Lux.
And are there other lessons that you've taken
At
from
the
that
same
relationship,
time,
other than the obsession?
Of course, the generosity of opening the doors, his doors, to other people to show their work. He was always a person who wanted to give space and a stage for all sorts of musical artists, visual artists, in Lisbon and across Portugal, I believe. And of course, music-wise, people from abroad also. But he wanted more than everything he saw Lux not as a club, not as a nightclub, a place where people go to dance and have a few drinks, but as a work of art overall, from the door, from the behavior of the people that are working. We are very, very, very tight with each other. We are restless. We are never happy with what we got. So we want to be and to make things always new, in a new way and in a better way. And that was what he taught us.
How important do you think that sense of community is to the fact that Lux has existed for 20 years? That there's a group of people who are willing to put in all of their energy into something that they truly believe in, separate from treating it just as a commercial concern?
I think you answered the question. The core of Lux, they work together at least 20 years, because some of them, they come from Fragil. And for instance, the team of residents, there isn't one that left Lux since the beginning. And we started with 7 residents. The whole 7 are there. There are like 2 or 3 more, but no one left. And every time someone left was heartbroken, It was very, very rare to see in 20 years someone living with a smile or with a grin.
And how do you think your own artistry as a DJ has evolved over those 20 years in response to the people that you have around you, first of all, these other residents, but also all the shifts that have occurred musically or in the city even?
It's being a resident in Lux and through. I play in Lux for 20 years, like I said, and I play every week. For 18 years, I played every week, except 4 weeks of holidays. So that makes 1,000 times I played in Lux, maybe. So it's difficult to talk about Rui Vargas as a DJ and not talk about Lux because I grew up there. That's where I learned my work and my thing. But it's a constant challenge to play week after week after week because the audience keeps on revolving, keeps on changing, and even with the same audience, moods are different from one day to other. It's a constant challenge, a non-ending challenge. And I swear, I go every single night that I have a long all-night set in Lux, playing 6 hours, and I go there like the first time, because it's my favorite night of the month. Every time I have 6 hours in a club, playing 6 or 7, and doing a painting with my records. Or trying to.
Is that your preferred metaphor of choice these days? Painting with records, or is there some other way that you describe you would describe what you're trying to do over those 6 hours?
I have a few more metaphors, but painting is one of them. But communicating is another one. Expressing maybe it's, and I even when I was young. Maybe it was easier for me to express my feelings to a girl through a mixtape than through a letter or talking directly. I always express myself through music, through other people's music. I learned to do that. So that's one way of seeing things. I'm trying to express myself and music through other people's music. But I'm creating like a big canvas where colors are substituted by records. Instead of colors, I use records, and I paint a huge mosaic every night I have in Lux for 6 hours, and I try to make a nice overall object instead of a messy one. Sometimes it happens to be like a messy, and because it's a live performance. It's not something I work at it at home or prepare things. Or 90% of what I do it's from improvisation. So. Sometimes I mess up, sometimes it's beautiful. It is like this.
I want to play another song that you had actually chosen as a representative of your time at Lux in some way.
Okay, sure. The simplicity of this record blew me away every time I hear it, and the power and the hugeness, the dimension of this record. Only made with 2 or 3 samples.
That was Moody Man, I Can't Kick This Feeling When It Hits. I think a record like that, I agree with you about the simplicity, and it's also timeless in a way. Like it's transcending all of these periods. And I was curious, what makes a record timeless to you, as someone who has heard so many, mixed with so many over the course of your career? what makes a record timeless in your ears?
That's a tough one. First has to be honest. You can't do a timeless record with tricks, gimmicks, or the new thing. Had to be honest, had to be true. It's a tough one, and basically it has to touch people's hearts somehow, and I think that's a tricky one. That's only a few people can grab themselves of doing that. I don't know. It was a tough question. But honestly, is the bottom line for me. As a DJ as well, I don't really care of people playing too neat, too perfect, too one sort of sound, one sort of music. And you go back to your house and you don't remember one record, one track, one song, one line. What I do care is to close my eyes, get into a club and know for sure that this can only be this guy. Even if he's messing up, taking risks. But honestly, above all, don't play a record you don't like. Never.
And as long as you're not playing records that you don't like, you're going to continue doing this for another 30 years, do you think?
Just as long as people are there.
I'm sure they will be. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We're going to open it up to questions. There are some microphones on either side, so if you just raise your hand, people will be able to run right over quickly and give you a microphone. There's one right in the middle. It'll take a while to pass down.
Hi, thank you very much. That was a really touching story that you told us.
Obrigado.
Yeah. So, with all the knowledge and the experience that you have, that you've been through your life, everything that you did, when you see these young generations approaching creative minds, approaching new issues, trying to break through, trying to create something new, do you have any piece of advice to those young generations which are trying to do their things as well? What tips would you give those young people today?
It's a bit vague, but you have to believe in yourself, and you have to believe that you can do different, and do different. One thing that struck me, again going to the beginning of the conversation, about this radio show that I was listening to every night. The slogan was "O direito à diferença," which means the right to the difference, or the right to be different. And throughout, I think I engraved that because be different was cool suddenly after 50 long years of censorship. And always trying to be different, I think, was also Manuel's motto in Lux that he passed to us. Always try to be creative, be different, do things our own way. and sometimes dismantling the rules, the norm, and twisting it, and believing in yourself. That's what I would say.
Is it something that you still try to apply to yourself as well?
Every day. And I try to believe in myself. Sometimes it's not easy, because there are, of course, playing in a club every week for 20 years. Sometimes you don't really feel empathic with the music, with the trends, with the music that is trendy in that period. So sometimes you struggle. Sometimes you shake. but if you believe you have what it gets, or what it takes. If you believe if you have what it takes, you go through the storm, and there's calmer seas after.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions? All right, then thank you again.
Obrigado.